beautiful round lake. Deep in the endless rainforests of the Amazon jungle, there was once a very prosperous village. As more and more children were born into their midst, they built more huts. And as if by themselves, their humble gardens and flocks of goats grew and grew. Nothing could have been better or easier for anyone. Even the many fruit trees which grew wild in that region seemed to flourish, producing larger and sweeter and more colorful fruit than at any previous time in their history. And because all went so well, for such a long time, the people of the village began to neglect certain things which their forefathers had taught them, such as cleaning up after themselves and repairing what was broken. And in time, they had quite forgotten what it was like to do anything at all. And so now, when things got dirty or fell into disrepair, they simply elected to move and leave their difficulties behind them. So they would stay in one spot until the mess grew to great proportions. The rotting fruit grew into great heaps, and the huts let in more rain than they kept out. And then they would move to a new spot and build new, even flimsier huts. Over the course of several years, their antipathy toward work pushed them counterclockwise around the lake. One day, they found that they had traveled all the way around to the very place they had started. And it was then and there that they decided to stop moving altogether, for moving about was quite tiring in its own right. One day, however, late in the afternoon, a strange thing happened. As the villagers were lying in their hammocks, complaining about how sore they were from lying in their hammocks, a mysterious series of smoke puffs appeared across the lake. It was difficult to make out their source, and everyone had grown so exquisitely lazy that even squinting was to them a laborious chore which irked them considerably and made them roll their eyes with impatience. Naturally, no one considered the possibility of walking around the lake to investigate, for that would have required a walk of nearly a quarter of an hour. Instead, they sat in their hammocks and tossed about various lofty possibilities until after many hours they arrived at an exceedingly clever alternative. You see, they hit upon the idea of selecting a small child among them, one whose eyes were very sharp. They would carry this eagle-eyed cherub to the very top of the tallest tree in the village, so as to give him the very best vantage point possible, and he would tell them what he saw. That way, no one would have to trudge around the lake, and they would still be able to determine the source of the mysterious smoke. It was settled. And if the truth must be told, and in the end it must, let it be known that the particular child that they selected was less a product of their long philosophical debates than of the relatively simple fact that little Pepe was not afraid of heights. When the child had been carefully carried into the highest branches of the great tree, everyone in the entire village waited at the bottom and all throughout the lower branches to discover the slightest nuance of what he saw. Finally, the child was brought down, but he was quite young, and for whatever reason he did not speak for some time. Everyone had their eyes focused on his mouth so intently that at one point when he hiccuped, an old woman clutched at her heart as though the heavens themselves had opened. When at last he spoke, everyone learned that the puffs of smoke they had seen came from the pipe of an old man who was sitting on the other side of the lake, and that with a knife he was cutting large leaves into the shapes of monkeys. But this only piqued their curiosity more than ever about who the man was and why he was doing what he was doing, and the debate that now followed was a grand overweening structure of many stories that went up and up and nowhere high into the sky. As they were carrying on amongst themselves, little Pepe wandered away from them and around the edge of the lake to where the man was seated smoking his pipe. Before anyone noticed that the small child had gone, he reappeared in their midst, holding the old man's hand. Now the people of the village were quite amazed at the old man's presence, but the old man hardly seemed to be aware of theirs. He only continued to puff his pipe and look around at the considerable mess and disrepair with sadness. Soon, one of the elders of the village, a very fat man, came forward. Well now, he said, we have come to understand that you cut leaves into odd shapes, eh? Yes, the old man replied. Well, what do you want from us then? The elder said impatiently. I hope you do not expect us to finance your hobby by buying them from you. We are very busy here, you realize? We have precious little patience with peddlers. But the old man only scratched his head and smiled. No, he said, I do not wish to sell them. In fact, you can have as many of them as you want. With that, he put his fingers in his mouth and whistled a loud, low whistle that carried to the other side of the lake, and in no time, 4 odd-looking monkeys that seemed very much like little men with long tails came scampering all the way around the lake, arriving in the midst of the people. Ah, yes, the old man said. As you see, they come to life after I release them from the various leaves which they inhabit. He smiled. And they are quite capable of every and any task imaginable. How many would you be requiring? Now the villagers just stood there trying to take this all in. They were not a little astounded that the man was able to cut figures that sprang to life, but their amazement was quickly eclipsed by an overwhelming desire to somehow use this old fool's naive generosity as a way to avoid work. Well, there isn't much around here we can't do ourselves, replied the elder craftily. You see, we're quite happy and self-sufficient, but just to please you, we will take as many of the hideous creatures as you need to get rid of. As you please, said the old man, take them all. Perhaps they could be best occupied cleaning up these piles of rotting fruit. And no sooner had he spoken this than the strange creatures commenced doing that very thing.